My name is Pam Devine, and I grew up in Orangevale. My family has been here since 1948, when my grandfather and my uncle came to build the Folsom Dam. I got involved in the Orangevale History Project a couple of months ago, so I haven't been with them very long, but I've always had an interest in the homes and history of Orangevale. I had a dear friend whose mother became a dear friend of mine. Her and her husband were born in the 1915. And so they knew a lot of the history of Orangevale and would always talk with their friends, the Tomiches or the Trailers or anybody else. And I loved hearing the stories. And Mary and I became even closer, and she was into the old homes in Orangevale, and she kind of got me interested in. So she would talk about the Palms, which, you know, we all knew that's where the Orbit gas station is now, and then Calder's home, and that was there. But she talked about other homes that were no longer but in the area. But one that always interested me was one that had the most beautiful grounds, she said. She had never really seen it, but she heard stories back in the 30s. So it always piqued my interest of where this home was. So I started looking a couple of years ago, and then when the Orangevale History Project came up, I met Mark and talked to Mark. And one thing I did find was the name of the family that owned the home originally, which was the Portwoods. So doing that, it kind of helped a little bit to try to find out where the house was at.
Okay, continue.
So in doing that, having the name of the family was a big breakthrough, because then I'd know who to look up. And running into Mark through the Orangevale History Project was a big plus for me, because it helped me get the tax from the assessor's office. No. Yes, assessor's office. Anyway, he looked up the name of the Portwoods and found out that they owned 3 10-acre parcels on Greenback Lane from Hazel to Beach, and then one other 10-acre parcel across from the old Palms, the old Calder home. So within that, we started doing research and started pulling things up and finding out when the home was built, and hopefully where the home was located exactly at. Because all the stories and newspaper articles talk about how it had the most beautiful garden and the view was extraordinary. You could see all the way to the Sierras and the American River from this home that was built a little bit on a hill elevation. So in the beginning, in 1893, the Portwoods came here from San Francisco, but originally they were from Kentucky. So they saw the land, and they decided that they wanted to build here. So they bought their property in 1893 and began building on the house. By 1898, they were living in their beautiful home in Orangevale, and they were starting to have parties there and have people come and stay with them. And I think that they were pretty good friends with the Calders by this time, because a lot of the parties included the Portwoods at the Calder's parties and vice versa. But the Portwoods didn't, from everything that I can tell, they didn't live here full time. They stayed in their home in San Francisco, and this was their country home, as they called it. So in the beginning, it had a couple of different names, and the one that we found that seemed to be more prominent and follow all the way through history, or most of the newspaper articles, was Fairview, which kind of makes sense since it had such a beautiful view that they called it Fairview. So they also planted palm trees. You know, if you look back at some of the articles that we had, they planted these beautiful palm trees all along the front of their estate. And so that was kind of a little clue for us to be able to follow where it was, you know, located. So as the time went on, the Portwoods, they lived here, and they called it Poinsettia Villa. And when I looked it up, the meaning, they had a couple of different spellings of it, but it was basically a plant from Madagascar. So that was kind of a throw in there. So following everything, we pretty much had to stick with the name of the Portwoods, because nobody really called the house anything but the Portwood home. So in 1902, we ran across, or I ran across, an article, and it was in a newspaper in 1902 of the Portwood home. They have it as C.B. Portwood, but actually his name was J.B. Portwood. And it talks about how beautiful the property was and how it was elevated enough that reiterating that it had such a beautiful view of even the American River. The palm trees, the beautiful trees, the ones that they planted in their garden. It was pretty spectacular. So it made us even want to find it even more. So then when we were looking at the county partial book, and Mark's the one who found that, it was lot number 26, 27, and 28. So we thought, oh, wow, this is great. We knew exactly where it was located, but we weren't for sure exactly where the house was. So going along, we started looking for pictures of the house, and we had basically descriptions of it, that it was, a colonial type home, and pretty much what it looked like and how many rooms that it had. And it had basically 10 rooms in the house. So Mark looked up, because we didn't have the home to take a picture of, so Mark looked up anything that came close to the photograph that we had in the newspaper, and that came up with this one from Cambridge, Massachusetts, to kind of give you an idea what it looked like, except for this one is a 2-story versus, or a 3-story versus the 2-story home, but it was basically on that line. In 1906, Portwood decided, him and his wife decided that they were going to move to Chicago, because their daughter had married in Chicago and was living in Chicago. So they were going to pack up, sell the home, and move to Chicago. So they were looking for people to buy their house. So the Mitchell family came along, Mrs. Mitchell, and she was from Chicago also, so they must have known her back there. And she bought the property from them in 1906. And it was the 30 acres. Well, for some reason, she didn't like it here. So she decided to go back to Chicago. We don't know if it was the heat. It definitely couldn't have been the winters, because they're 10 times worse in Chicago. But she moved back right away. She didn't spend much time here. So that brought us into the next owner of the house, which was in 1908. The owner, oh, I'm sorry, I skipped somebody there. So Mrs. Mitchell sold the house to Mrs. Cash. And Mrs. Cash basically bought the property, but didn't live there very long because she wound up passing away. So then we come to 1908, which is where the Cash estate went into Sacramento probate, or the sale of the property, when Harry Thorp came into the picture, who was the president of Weinstock's and David Lubin's department store downtown on K Street. So Henry Thorp bought the property. He retired basically from Weinstock's and was going to put all his investments into the town of Orangevale. And he loved this beautiful home because of it sitting up on that hill and the trees, and just everything about it was just fabulous and beautiful. And he would have parties there and picnics from the employees of Weinstock's to come out and see this beautiful residence. But he did buy all the 30 acres there. And so then we come to 1909, and this is where we saw the article from Great West Magazine showing the home. So that was another confirmation. We had the Calder's home, which we all knew about, and the Palm, which is there. And it was on this advertisement. So that was kind of cool. So it made us even want to look and make sure we got the history of this home even more. So then we come up to 1908 and the Sacramento Star article on Thorp's new car that he had at his new home he purchased, which was basically, they said, the gateway of Orangevale. So that was another clue. So we started looking at all the different articles and things about it, and he bought the 30 acres for $14,200, if you could imagine. So back in those days, that was a heck of a buy for a piece of property for 30 acres, which would amount to today $434,000. So he got a bargain. He also bought another piece of land that he made a good deal on, which was out off by Folsom Auburn Road, I was told. And it was 90 acres that he purchased for $5,000, if you could even imagine. So he was doing really, really well in Orangevale and his purchasing different properties. So Harry Thorp, he did a lot of things to the property to make it even, enhance it even more than what it was. So he had everything from all different kinds of flowers and landscaping, and then they decided to have it called a game farm. So he had game birds. He would travel all over the world and come home with songbirds, and he had 2 aviaries. He had a duck pond. He had a dog run. All these wonderful, elaborate things going on this piece of property. So we decided, okay, we got to find exactly what lot this house was on. So we ran across another article, and it was one that I ran across, and it was of the Thorp home. And it kind of just confirmed his view and the residence of the house and the front of the house. And it was a picture that I had never really seen before. I hadn't really ever seen it before, but when I was looking at it, it was really starting to look very familiar. And then I realized that it was a picture of Greenback Lane with the palm trees all the way down pretty much to the Calder's home. So this was in 1908, was this photograph. Between 1908 and 1919 is when it was. So then all of a sudden we see that Thorp has had enough of Orangevale. He's going to go, and being off of work, he's decided he's going to sell all his interests in this area and move to back to San Francisco and go to work for a large department store in San Francisco. So that was in 1917. So when we started looking at all these different ads and the sale of Harry Thorp's home, we realized that these pictures are really looking familiar, and some of the entrances with the river rock and the foundations of the fences and the retaining walls, all was just looking really, really familiar. So then we see the for sale signed pictures of the house, and that he is selling the home in Orangevale, and he was selling it for $120,000. So in 1919, he sold the home, and it was sold to a Mr. Rister, and William Rister. And he lived in the house for probably, a year, or owned the home for a year. And he decided to sell the home again. And a Dr. I never say this right. Herbsturpsman came along, he and his wife, Mary, and he was a doctor. And he bought the property in 1920. From Harry Thorp, and all except he bought the 3-acre partial, 10-acre partials, except for lot number 228, Thorp had given to Orangevale as their clubhouse. So where Greenback and Hazel sits is partial property that he gave to Orangevale for their clubhouse. So that was really kind of interesting. He was a very kind man, and he was really into making sure Orangevale succeeded, and he was on a lot of boards, the water board, and all different kinds of things were going on in Orangevale at that time, and he was right there with them all.
What sits on the property now?
What sits on the property now is Orangevale Chamber of Commerce. So this is what...
The clubhouse.
Oh, this is where we sit, is right here, where the chamber is, on the corner of Hazel and Greenback. And that's where the old clubhouse was before it burned down. But he did donate the money, or the property, for the clubhouse to be here. So when the doctor came along and bought the property, he got the 3-acre partials, but only half of lot 228, which is where the chamber sits today. So by 1933, the doctor and his wife were gone for the evening, and they came home to the house burning down, and it burned to the ground. The only thing that still stayed was a couple of cottages on the property, but the trees and everything were gone. But smaller buildings were saved, and the duck pond was saved. So, and now it's going to be up for sale again. There were some theories that maybe, like when we had the big frost and a lot of people lost their land, that maybe something happened to this property and the fruit trees, and that they might have done something a little bit that they shouldn't have to be able to come out of what they paid for the house back in those days. Even if it was not as expensive, it still was probably doing something to their livelihood. So then in 1936, the Thorp Ranch, which is what they now call it, not the Portwood home or Fairview or anything, was sold. And it still had the ponds and the aviaries and the garden and everything. So it was still, quite a beautiful place to be able to buy. So we come to our final grandioso that put the nail on the coffin, made us realize where it was, and it was a picture of Greenback Lane. And it's one that most of us have seen if we've been on Orangevale Facebook page or any of the articles of the history of Orangevale. You see this beautiful road, you see all the trees that go all the way down to pretty much the Calder's home, and you also see the Sierras, the foothills. If everything was out of the way and there weren't any trees, I bet you could see the American River. Looking at this picture, we realized it was the right picture, and you could see what everybody was talking about, that the palm trees went all the way down to the Calder's home, and you could see the road that went all the way to the Sierras. So it was a beautiful view. It was great. But which lot was it? So it has to be one of the higher lots that was there. So the pillars, the retaining walls, everything was there. Everything that came up from all the ads and the house being for sale, all the sales pictures. We knew this was the front of his home, the Thorp home. So looking at the lots and trying to figure out, the highest ground definitely was lot 226. And that was on the other side of beach. He also owned lot 227, which was in the middle and now is part of the Cable Shopping Center. Then we had the tract 228, which only partial of it was because he had given it away. So that was also part of his land. So here we have a picture of what it looked like in 1925, and we have a picture of what it looks like in 2022. So you can see the Sierras. You can see everything, the way the road went, Greenback Lane went right on to Folsom. You can see a lot of the trees that were the same, those beautiful oak trees. So we realized, the road definitely has been widened, as you can tell, where they had to probably cut into a lot of his property on both sides of the street to make it wide enough for 4 lanes. But we found it, and we were excited. So then we come Mark. I was on my way down to Sacramento to see if I could find some beautiful pictures of the home, if it was as splendid as they say, and the most beautiful home in Northern California. There had to be a picture of this house somewhere. So I was off going down to the Sacramento Library to see what I could find. Mark went to the apartment complex at Heather Ridge, and no one was there to answer any questions that he had. So he decided to walk the property. So he did. And look what he found. He found the pillars. He found one pillar and then another one partially buried under palm trees, which were probably sprouted from the good old days when they lived there. Same pillars, they matched up. There was even a hole where the electricity and the light fixture would fit up on the top. So that was really exciting. It was like, oh my gosh, it's still there. I mean, it's amazing it's still there. So we were very surprised, and we were very excited. So one of the best parts was Mark walks around and he comes back up to the pillars, and he's now looking at the back side of it, and I'll be doggone, there's H. Thorp, 1908. Eureka, we found it. It's there. It's been there. It's been there for 115 years, and no one has done anything to it. It's still there on that lot, right where the driveway sat. Because they had another columns that walked up to the house, but these were from the driveway. So hopefully we are able to do something with these down the road, and we can preserve them instead of letting them lay in a lot that has a for sale sign on it. And that's the whole history of the Thorp Portwood home in Orangevale, the most beautiful home in Northern California.
Thank you.
Thank you. I need a drink.